When I ask you to think of neurodivergent characters, who comes to mind? You might think of really harmful examples like Rain Man or Sheldon Cooper. Or you might think of more recent examples like the show Atypical. The topic of neurodiversity in media is becoming increasingly more visible and more discussed in recent years. Over the years, neurodivergent folks have finally been able to break into the writers' rooms and begin telling their own stories, leading to more interesting and more authentic representation. Today, I'm here to talk about how this movement has affected children's film and television. In 2019, the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media published a study of various types of representation in children's film and television. It showed that in children's film, 8.1% of leading characters had some sort of disability, the highest amount in over a decade. Although it's worth pointing out that 1 in 4 Americans have some sort of disability. Disabilities continue to be underrepresented in all media, and children's media is no exception. In order to know how much further we have to go, we need to look at how far we've come. There's a popular Tumblr post floating around the internet that matches Winnie the Pooh characters to various mental conditions. What those posts never address, however, is just how bad this representation is. Each character is built almost entirely off of stereotypes. Piglet is always scared, Tigger is always hyperactive, Eeyore is always sad. This was the type of representation I was exposed to as a kid, and not just in Disney. Rugrats had Chucky, who reinforced stereotypes of anxiety. As I got older, I saw a lot of instances of crazy villains like the Joker and whatever this absolute mess was with Azula. There's theories out there that a lot of Disney villains show autistic traits, but I'm not going to go there. To me, Disney villains overall tend to show more queer coding than anything else. Trying to find neurodivergence in the Disney Renaissance is hard, which has led to people grasping at straws for examples of representation. There's plenty of characters that could have been great, but none that were written to explicitly be neurodivergent. Disney's experimental era is also hard to analyze in hindsight, because the films were kind of all over the place. There's a theory that Lilo is autistic given her obsessive interests and her apparent lack of social skills. I would argue Milo from Atlantis could be neurodivergent given his obsession with learning everything he possibly can about Atlantis. It feels very hyper-focusy. I mean, I guess there's Dory, but I wouldn't necessarily call her a good example of neurodivergence, given that she's a trope of memory loss and her condition is repeatedly targeted for laughs.
See, I suffer from short-term memory loss.
Short-term memory loss. I don't believe this.
No, it's true. I forget things almost instantly. It runs in my family. Well, I mean, at least I think it does. Where are they? Can I help you?
But starting in the early 2010s, Disney began producing stories that were not only intended to be neurodivergent, but those characters have a lot more nuance. Elsa was a clear portrayal of this. She's argued to have anxiety and/or depression, and shows how bottling it inside does not actually help anyone. Big Hero 6, released a year later, tackled the depression that often comes with grief. To me, the most pivotal change in representation came in 2015 with Inside Out. Almost immediately after its release, mental health professionals began co-opting characters as a teaching tool for children. Part of the reason Inside Out was so successful was that Disney sought help from experts in the study of emotion. Not only does this film show how emotions affect Riley's behaviors, but some of the emotions themselves are neurodivergent. Fear has anxiety, sadness has depression, joy also shows signs of possibly having ADHD.
And barf. Joy. Yes, Joy. You'll be in charge of the console, keeping Riley happy all day long. And may I add, I love your dress. It's adorable. Oh, this old thing? Thank you so much. I love the way it twirls. Train of thought. Right on schedule. Anger. Unload the daydreams. I ordered extra in case things get slow in class.
Here's where I started to notice how far we've come from the days of Winnie the Pooh. These emotions are simplified versions of their conditions because this is a film for kids. Crucially though, they are still authentic and nuanced. Sadness isn't always crying. She spends half the film just wanting to lie on the ground doing nothing. Which, girl, same. I love how the film goes out of its way to show that even something you think is negative like sadness or fear exists for a reason.
sadness. Mom and Dad, the team, they came to help because of sadness.
Inside Out also gave quite possibly my favorite visualization of depression, and that's this scene. Because a lot of people with depression say that it's not a matter of being sad, it's a matter of not feeling anything.
What have we done?
I was an adult when Inside Out was released, and this scene still took my breath away with how raw and honest it felt. Because I can't always just cheer up. My emotions aren't able to work the controls that make me cheer up. I get how that can lead to Riley wanting to run away. When depression is severe, I'd find myself increasingly nostalgic, trying to get back to a time when I thought I was happier.
All the good core memories were made in Minnesota. Ergo, we go back to Minnesota and make more. Ta-da!
Wait. You're saying we run away?
Well, I wouldn't call it that. I'd call it the Happy Core Memory Development Program.
Disney princesses tend to have a checklist of traits given to them.
Do you have magic hair?
No.
Magic hands?
No.
Do animals talk to you?
No.
Were you poisoned?
No.
Cursed?
No.
Kidnapped or enslaved?
Another common one is growing up without one or both parents. However, in the 90s and 00s, the trauma associated with a lost family member was never really addressed.
I don't even have a mom. Neither do we.
Disney has slowly been addressing the concept of trauma in the last decade. Big Hero 6, Frozen, and Maleficent all come to mind. The first time Disney seemed to acknowledge generational trauma was in Coco, how the loss of her husband affected how Imelda raised her descendants. Some of you have likely guessed where I'm going with this. It's time to talk about Encanto. Encanto is not only a great film in how it explains generational trauma, it's a great tapestry of neurodiversity.
Okay, so we gonna talk about Bruno.
It's Bruno.
Bruno is pretty obviously the character that a lot of people are focused on. The bait and switch between how he's talked about and how he is in person is fantastic. I love that Disney used the lime green color to aid in this misdirect. For those who haven't realized, lime green is a color that Disney saves almost exclusively for villains. Even neurotypicals who are completely ignorant about autism picked up on Bruno's idiosyncrasies. The compulsive
Knock on wood.
is a fairly obvious coping tool for anxiety. He also shows several hallmark traits of autism. Let's look at 4 of these. Number 1. Bruno is extremely straightforward and honest in discussing his visions. People interpret this to mean that he is either evil or at the very least a bad omen. Autistic people often communicate in a straightforward manner that often gets interpreted as rude. This also plays a factor in why Peppa didn't realize Bruno was joking about the clouds on her wedding day. Number 2. Hernando, Bruno's sort of second personality. A lot of people have associated this with masking. Masking is not exclusive to autism. Masking is the experience of hiding one's neurodivergence or adopting more socially accessible traits. Hernando isn't scared to patch up the walls, even though Bruno very much is. Masking is an extremely exhausting practice for many. Masking doesn't really benefit the autistic person. It exists to make neurotypicals more comfortable by hiding the way that a person is different. Number 3. Autistic people can have different ways of showing affection, not using any of the common love languages. Our clue that Bruno does this is seen in how his family thinks he doesn't love them.
Bruno left our family because you only saw the worst in him.
Bruno didn't care about this family.
He loves this family. I love this family.
Number 4. As a consequence of constantly being misunderstood, Bruno decides to isolate himself. Having to constantly be masking and being on guard can be overwhelming, and some people end up socially isolated as a result.
My family's amazing. And I'm in my family, so.
Yes, what about Mirabelle? When I first saw her, I couldn't believe we finally got a Disney princess with glasses. Proud of you, Disney! It only took you 84 years when glasses have existed since the 13th century. But you know, at least you finally acknowledged that young people wear glasses too. Many people also suggest that Mirabelle is autistic. Not getting her own door and powers can be seen as an allegory for neurodivergence. a trait that she was born with, cannot change, and one that makes her feel like a disappointment to Abuela. If we're looking at Mirabel through the lens of autism, she makes a refreshing change to autistic characters of the past. She's outgoing, bubbly, and extremely empathetic, all things that autistic people can be. Often in the media, autistic people are portrayed as being oblivious to their diagnosis. Mirabel consistently shows that she is extremely aware and self-conscious of the way that she is different from the rest of her family. A 2019 study at Oxford stated that autistic people have a tendency towards object personification, the attribution of human characteristics to non-human things, be that animals or objects. This is something most children do, but the study indicates that autistic people may be more likely to do this and may continue to do it later in life than non-autistic folks. I bring this up because to Mirabel, Casita is a person.
Wait, how do I save a miracle? I figure out what's happening to the miracle. Oh, I have no idea.
She interacts with Casita in a way the others do not. The only other person to address the house by name is Abuela. However, Abuela addresses Casita in a very different manner.
Magic. You do!
Mirabel, if you can't pay attention, I will help you.
Actually,
Casita? As I was saying...
Abuela treats Casita like a tool or a servant, but Mirabel treats Casita as a friend. On to the next Madrigal. Tia Peppa clearly has anxiety. What I loved is that Peppa shows us how harmful some outdated coping techniques can be. Her interactions with Abuela are all how Abuela is trying to scold her daughter into controlling her anxiety. This is clearly a dynamic that was years in the making.
Peppa, you have a cloud.
I know, Mama, but now I can't find Antonio. What do you want from me?
In the song We Don't Talk About Bruno, Felix says the line, "No clouds allowed in the sky." But he's not saying that to Peppa. He's telling Mirabel that that was the rule for the day. It's likely the rule was given by Abuela, who didn't want the bride's anxiety to ruin everyone else's good time. Coping mechanisms like this are often created to make neurotypicals around them feel better, addressing the visible symptoms while refusing to acknowledge any underlying causes or trauma.
Peppa, the cloud.
One thing that I really love about Peppa is the ending scene. She's dancing, visibly happy and having a great time, all while it's hailing. Just because a person is happy doesn't mean they stop having anxiety, because anxiety disorder isn't just a mood, it's an actual condition that is there whether you can see it or not.
Great. Now I'm thundering.
One final note on Encanto. Julieta, who can heal people with food, is extremely important in the validation of these disabled characters. While her talent can heal traumatic injuries, it does not cure Peppa of anxiety. It does not fix Bruno. It doesn't even give Mirabel 20/20 vision. Because disabled people don't need to be fixed, they need to be accepted. I want to take a step back here and talk about a few great examples that aren't Disney. Because this succession of great neurodiverse characters isn't confined to Disney either. And the fact that when I googled neurodivergent Disney characters, I immediately got non-Disney characters as well. It's pretty well established in the mental health field that some conditions like ADHD and autism can present very differently in girls and tend to be underdiagnosed. Which brings me to Anne with an E. Based on the classic story Anne of Green Gables, this retelling is delightful and an extremely honest portrayal of being a girl with ADHD.
White dress with beautiful puff sleeves. It is my highest ideal of earthly bliss. Am I talking too much? People are always telling me that I do, and it seems to cause no end of aggravation. Would you rather I didn't talk? If you say so, I'll stop. I can stop when I make up my mind to it, although it's difficult.
What I really love is that this show allows us a glimpse into society before these conditions had really broken into the general consciousness. Throughout much of the show, Anne is treated as a chaotic, willful child. But the showrunners are careful, showing us clearly that Anne often has the best of intentions and simply cannot maintain the focus necessary to complete a task. They also show us some of the amazing sides of ADHD, most evident in Anne's endless imagination.
We could make a game to see who could conduct the most romantic courtship with brave knights and enchanted princesses and sorcerers and desperados. It'd be great practice.
What I was not expecting from this show was that Anne's adoptive father, Matthew, presents as autistic. Now, Avonlea is a bit of a utopia about this, where most people kindly accept that both Anne and Matthew are just a bit odd. The show is still a champion of the fact that neurodiversity has always existed. We just didn't have science or terms to identify it like we do now. The second non-Disney example I want to talk about also comes from Netflix. A few months back, I got scolded by a couple of different friends because I had yet to watch Netflix's She-Ra. They were right to be surprised. It was a travesty I'd waited so long, and I proceeded to binge watch it at an astonishing rate. I knew Netflix had dubbed the series part of their Representation Matters collection, and rightly so, because as I watched, I became obsessed with one character in particular. Entrapta is the best autistic character I've seen in a kids' TV show, or quite possibly any show. Her unparalleled skill with tech would place her in the savant trope, but they do make sure to show that she doesn't often do it right on the first try.
Well, there's no reason to get huffy because an experiment failed. Failure is a vital part of all scientific endeavor. What if I had given up on you after the first explosion? Or the 50th? I know, I should leave, but I have to stay for science.
I delight in watching her obsess over new tech, or her inability to modulate the volume of her voice in comparison to those around her. But more importantly, I delight in her friendships. Her self-awareness that friendships aren't easy for her.
Are you all mad at me?
You're seriously just realizing?
I'm not good at people, but I am good at tech. I thought maybe if I could use tech to help you, you'd like me. But I messed that up too.
Not only does she learn how to maintain friendships, but crucially, her friends also learn how to adapt to her as well. Because autistic people aren't beyond accountability or the ability to change, but the onus should not be solely on them to fit into a neurotypical world. So the other princesses learn how to communicate better with her as well. Stephen Sondheim's Into the Woods ends with a very pointed statement about the nature of stories.
Careful the things you say, children will listen. Careful the things you do, children will see and learn.
The stories we tell children matter because they influence who those children grow up to be. Not only do these stories help neurodivergent kids feel less alone, they can impact the overall attitude upcoming generations have towards mental health. Because now it's not just villains, not just stereotypes. Now kids can see how complex these conditions can be. They can see that autism presents in a wide spectrum of behaviors, or that depression doesn't always mean sad. It's important to remember that the push for better representation isn't over. That 2019 report by the Gina Davis Institute also showed that in children's films, disabled characters were almost 3 times more likely to have died in the film than their non-disabled counterparts. By changing how these stories are told, we are changing the frame of reference to one that is more inclusive, more kind. And heck, maybe adults can learn something from these stories too.
Careful